Good morning, all. Welcome to our Sunday adult school class, going through the transition from the age of the patriarchs, ending with Joseph and Job, and aiming towards the Exodus. We are counting down to the birth of Moses. So, Brother Tim, I must say you look pretty good overall. In your overalls, yes. So we will be in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. That's the last verse of scripture we had read last time. So as we are counting down to the birth of Moses, we are definitely seeing a transition in the world around the Lord's people, especially in their environment in Egypt, but not limited to there as well. And so what we see again is the Lord's hand behind the scenes in transitioning and preparing from one event to the next. And so when we see different things happening that might seem quote unquote random, and sometimes some things are, let's not over spiritualize everything, but let's not be too quick to dismiss also, and to balance that. And let's keep a spiritual eye and ear open for maybe the Lord's working on something and working out something or bringing some things to pass. He certainly was, of course. Here we are in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. This man was Levi's grandson Amram, and the daughter of Levi is Jochebed. These will be the parents of Moses and his siblings. So that was the last scripture we had read. The last event we had mentioned with the Lord's people was from the line from Joshua down to, from Joseph down to Joshua. Joshua is a descendant of Joseph. How in that line looks to be rough ballpark that in that line coming down from Joseph to Ephraim, that Laadan, about 20 years old, fathered Ammihud, as we're counting on down. Now, I know that doesn't mean a lot to me, just rattling off these names and these words. I made a reference to this last week and I threatened to bring it, and I did. Show and Tell, my new book, All the Genealogies of the Bible. All the genealogies of the Bible, yes. So much fun, yes. Yes, fortunately, it's not King James. No offense. So, but just on this very topic, well, let me share from the beginning what it says here in the commentaries that I thought worth mentioning, or the kind of intro stuff here. And this will relate to that. That these genealogies are not just informative to the historical record, but are deeply and profoundly theological. For the working out of the saving purposes of God was through persons who lived and died and left progeny, kids, to carry on the mission. Who they were, how they were related, both vertically and laterally, and what role they played. All this is an ingredient into the matrix of this fancy German word, kind of theology found in the Old Testament. Basically, God is working through these people and these families and relationships to accomplish that. Who are the people of God? To understand the genealogies is to reveal the big picture of how God worked through his covenant family to bring about the line of the Messiah and salvation for his people. This offers modern Christians a new way to appreciate their spiritual heritage. We might not be blood Jews, but we are part of spiritual Israel with those following their Messiah. And now let's see, what else did I want to bring out here? We learned the difference. There are different names in the Bible. Let me see here. And this kind of helps clear that up. What's really cool about this is the back has a couple indices. It has a gazillion pages listing out all the Bible references. So if you want to look up a Bible reference, you can look it up there. Look up a chapter and verse and see all the places it's mentioned. If you want to look up a person's name, it has a name index. So you can see all the different pages that person's name pops up. So there's that too. And it's got a ton of names, as you can imagine. This is Old and New Testament. So here's the thing. Did you know there was more than one Zadok in the Bible? Did you know there was a Zadok in the Bible? Yeah, there's a Zadok in the Bible. There's more than one. There's a whole bunch of them listed here. And so what's one thing you can do any free software Bible program and show me all the scriptures that list this name Zadok. What that doesn't tell you is which Zadok is which. So what's nice about here is this index shows the different Zadoks. Okay, this is talking about that one. This was talking about that one. So that kind of makes sense. There's a Zadok who is high priest, anointed by Solomon as David's successor. Zadok who anointed Solomon as David's successor, and all those things. There are a couple other Zadoks on down. But so to help with us as we are trying to, you know the saying, make lemonade out of lemons. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. That's kind of what my approach is to genealogies. Sometimes we see these things and they're not very exciting. Okay, so it's part of the Bible. It's there for a reason. What's the best how can we make something good out of this? Well, it is good. How can we appreciate the good that it is? Because this is not something that we normally dive into or get excited about or see a spiritual benefit to. So for me, life makes sense when it's put on a spreadsheet. That's just me. You can visualize it. You can see it. There it is. Kind of like what I did. Okay, here's the death of Joseph. Here's the birth of Moses and the Exodus. And oh, look, here's the life of Job afterwards, after his events, and it all fits right there. You can visualize it. Well, here with the ancestry family trees, we can see here what we just read, what we just shared about the line of Joseph down to Joshua. It's backwards up there, so that doesn't help you at all. Well, we're learning to be Hebrews and read from right to left. So that's funny. You know what? It's backwards on my screen too. So I'll have to look at fixing that for my presentations. But yeah, so yeah. So these are why you're supposed to practice these things at home before you do it.
Well, I'm not trying to, I told them, well, I don't see it on Zoom as backwards, but then I've been thinking, how many times have you actually turned something to the?
Oh, okay.
You know?
So on Zoom, it's not just on the what's coming from the laptop is. So I'll just have to change have to change the laptop settings, but on Zoom, it's coming out okay. Good to know. Okay. So for those of you on Zoom and the recording, you can see here that it gives the line from Joseph down across the page to Joshua. So pretty spiffy there. And that's just one example. And it's just really neat how it lays all that out. So I will take the time to dive in and clean that up and try to make a more visual, clear presentation so we can kind of get a better grasp of who these people are, where they fall in, and why it matters, and help it be of a little more benefit to us than rather just a bunch of names that mean nothing to us at all. So appreciate your forbearance with me as we're diving into those things. So that brings us to our presentation here. Yeah.
Yeah. On Zoom, it's correct.
On Zoom, it's correct. Thank you, Zoom.
It's on the screen.
Just on the screen. Okay, so that's just directly the laptop here. So I'll see how to change the presentation there. All righty, so we're getting some timeline background from Egyptologist David Roll, and otherwise we are following the Bible as these things are playing out. We are counting down to the birth of Moses. Ammihud was born to Laadan. I'm ballparking about 1548 BC. So we are in the Middle Bronze Age 2A. China is being ruled by Yangji of the Shang Dynasty over where China is. We have in Egypt, current pharaoh at this point in time is, I was about to say a gentleman name, but I don't know if he's a gentleman or not. This guy named right over here, Seth Meribre. Pull him up. There he is. He is the current pharaoh in Egypt, and that's from his time frame. This is a very unique time. It's in Egypt. It's their second intermediate period. This guy's in their 13th dynasty. Joseph was during their high point with the Middle Kingdom and the 12th dynasty. This 13th dynasty, it's not a high point for Egypt. It's in between the Middle Kingdom and their later New Kingdom. And so what's happening, Egypt is pretty much territory-wise, they're, even though it can be united at times, it's still basically recognized as two different parts. And the Nile River flows from the south up to the north to the Mediterranean. And so the southern part is considered Upper Egypt, and the northern part is considered Lower Egypt. And so what we're having right now is, especially in the northern part, Lower Egypt, where the land of Goshen is, where the Israelites are, the native Egyptians are in a weakened state, and the growth of the Hebrew Israelites, as scripture proclaims, is causing them to have a lot of influence, especially coming off of Joseph and what he did for Egypt as well. So the native Egyptians are less powerful, and there's a greater influence by the foreigners, the Hebrews, that are in the land at this time. So this is going to be causing some resentment and some uprising from those down in the south, and we'll be getting to that here today. So over in the land of Assyria, in their early days of their old kingdom, we have their king Isme-Dagan I over in Larsa in Mesopotamia. Rimsin is their last king. And we talked last time about Babylon's new king, Meribre, and his code, his law code that he is quite famous for. And we will be seeing, that's the cap of it. Let's see, boom, boom, boom. We will be seeing a comparison between the law of Moses and the law code of Hammurabi when we get to the law of Moses. So that's what it's written on there. So he's alive and doing his thing at this time. Byblos, they're over on Phoenicia. Their king is Isme-Dagan. And in the middle of everything, we have in Mari, King Yamsa-Adad. So we got Mari kind of right over here. Yamsa-Adad is the whiny kid whose letters we wrote between his dad and his brother and all that stuff. So Mari's right here. We got Babylon right here, Larsa and Ison in this area, Byblos over there. And of course, Lord's people are all right here, and that's where they will be going. So with all of that, in the line of Christ, the line of the tribe of Judah, we have Hezron alive, probably about 113 years old right now. His son Ram, about 55 years old right now. So moving forward, the changes are about to be taking place. So during the rule, these years, while these outsiders, these foreigners are having influence, and Egypt actually calls these folks Asiatics because they're from the continent of Asia, where Egypt is on the continent of Africa. When I hear Asiatics, I think Asian, like Chinese, Japanese, and no, this is, the Middle East is on the continent of Asia. And so I sometimes forget that or lose sight of that. The Eurasians are the descendants of Japheth, who came from this area here, a lot of Greece and Turkey, and across over here into India. There's actually some fascinating connections with the Vedic Indians and the folks over here in that region. So good question, Indo-Europeans. So we have a Pharaoh up here talking about the influence of the Hebrews. Oops. The influence of the Hebrews. We have a Pharaoh up here whose name is Hetepre-Amu-Sa-Har-Nej-Heretith, which means the Asiatic, who's the son of Har-Nej-Heretith. So even in his name, they knew that he was not from Egypt. So interesting that that would happen. Yeah, Brother Clay.
When was that area or India given a name that's Asia? Just after the fact, because like say people were given different names after they passed away, or or
yeah, great question. So Brother Clay is asking about the timing of the names of these places, and what I will say is that it changes, and it people refer to things at something at their time and then it's referred to as something else at a later time, especially if it's been conquered. A great example is Byzantine, Constantinople, Istanbul. It's all the same city, just given different names at different times, according to who's conquering it or what's going on there. So another example would be the land where the area of Egypt where the Hebrews are, the land of Goshen. During their time, it's known as Rohawari, which means the mouth of the two rivers, because back in that time, the Nile River coming up here branched off, and they're basically flourishing on one branch called the Peleasic branch. That's really not so much there anymore. But it was called Rohawari, mouth of the two rivers. Then it later became known as Avaris, and then later became known as what we have now, the mound where it's being built. It became known as Ramses. Well, that was when there was a pharaoh named Ramses. What's that? Yeah, exactly. And so, but what happened was, as the Bible is being copied over the years, and that's happening over, of course, multiple years, these names are changing. The places are still the physical places and locations, but things are changing. And so as they're copying the Bible, what they're doing sometimes is updating the names to names that the people they're copying the Bible in their present generation for, names that they recognize. So we see in Genesis, I believe it's chapter 46, verse 11, that Joseph and his family were settled in the land of Ramses. There is pretty much no one in the world who thinks there was a Ramses at the time of Joseph. Let's recognize the fancy word is an anachronism. Anna meaning contrary to, and chronism meaning time, meaning that name was updated contrary to what the name was at the time. And so that's pretty much recognized in Genesis 46:11. That's what happened. Okay, cool. No one has a problem with that. Yet, when it comes to Exodus 1, verse 11, when the Hebrews built the city of Ramses, that lots of people say, oh, Ramses had to be the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Well, if we clearly know Ramses wasn't really there yet for Genesis 46, why do we insist it had to be Ramses in Exodus 1? And so they have a double standard. They accept it in one case, they don't accept it in the other. And so just because it was referred to as Ramses, it's just like Genesis, where, okay, as the Bible is being copied, they're just updating the names. Some of you here in this very room might have Bibles that say the word Arab. Others might have Bibles that say the word Syria. They're talking about the same place. Just depends on your translation and if they chose to update that or not. Yeah, exactly. So does all that confusion clear that up as clear as mud? Because people.
No, okay. That's what I was getting on it. They called he was Asiatic.
Yeah.
From Asia. He wasn't called Asian.
Exactly. So basically, and that's what we say, their word was Amu, A-A-M-U, kind of in our alphabet, for these foreigners. And so, which we recognize they're referring to foreigners who are coming from this area of Syria and Canaan, which is on the continent of Asia. So a lot of these things are our English words for their foreign words, just like Japan doesn't call itself Japan, it's Nippon. Egypt doesn't call itself Egypt. It's actually named, and I'm blanking out at the moment, shame on me, Mizraim, which is, one of the sons of Ham. So an Egyptian doesn't say I'm Egyptian, he says I'm El-Mazri, I'm of, Mizraim, who is the guy from the Bible, whether that connection's realized or not. So yeah, so because of people and because of life and human nature, things change and references change. Excuse me. Most of the names we know the pharaohs by, like Ramses, no one in Egypt called him Ramses. That is the Greek version of his name. Because when Napoleon, the French guy, went to Egypt in the 1800s and basically started Egyptology with uncovering all these things, excuse me, that's when they decided to go with the Greek names for these things. My voice is giving out. Y'all may be in for a very short message today. So, Yeah, I'll take some water. Thank you. Yeah. And so it is an appropriate thing to do, to stop and ask a question and say, okay, these names that we're throwing out and that we're just kind of taking for granted, where do they actually come from? Why are we using these names? And let's not assume that the names we're familiar with are what everyone else is familiar with. And there's whole different concepts, whole different cultures. Do you know there's some people who say Talari?
Yes.
Siri does, or whatever on my the driver thing, or
Lar.
or depending which syllable you emphasize. Yeah, Tulare versus Tulare.
Yeah, there's two layers.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That makes sense.
I always say it wrong too.
But who says what's right? Tomato, tomato. That's what's called the whole thing off.
No, neither.
Yeah, neither. It's neither here nor there. So yeah,
Like Yankee,
yeah, that just is what it is.
but no, because like in England, they call all of America Yankees,
Yeah.
right? Yankees.
Yanks, yeah.
Right? Where Southerners call it Yankee. But yeah,
And
Yankees don't call themselves Yankees.
and redneck is not a Southern thing; it's a Scottish thing.
It's Scottish. Yeah.
Yes. So
It's just identifiers.
exactly. It's all different identifiers, like names in a genealogy. Yeah.
You memorize that.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Where's that embedded now? Oh, boy.
Some people count sheep.
He's got a stack of books on the side of his bedside table, and he just, every night, he picks up one, reads a little, puts it down, picks up another, reads, I mean, he just rotates it and reads all a little bit every night.
Sister Minnie, do you have a hand up?
No,
Okay.
I'm going like this.
Okay. Oh, no, she's fine. No, that's what we're here for.
Oh, here we go, my bedroom secrets.
Oh,
Well.
that's how wild and crazy I am. So, moving on down the timeline, as we're seeing this major influence that's causing a problem, or being viewed as a problem, with these Israelites, these Hebrews, these Asiatic, these Amu foreigners in the land of Egypt.
Aaron,
Yeah,
it's funny to me when you talk about these people looking at each other as foreigners, when we all know where they came from, they're all cousins, right?
their ancestors all came off the ark with
Yeah,
Noah.
I mean, more or less, they're all related, so it's interesting to me and especially when you hear about them, warring with each other, which is why it's interesting, because, genealogy is important, right? It was obviously important to ancient people. So, I mean, did no one ever say, wait, this is, we can't be doing all this stuff because this is our seventh cousin once removed, or, my aunt, Jean's brother Billy's, next door neighbor, cousin, or whatever. It's kind of interesting that man's propensity is to conquer and spread out and fight.
I can
Yeah.
just hear them saying, your mother wore combat.
Right.
Your mother was a Hittite. That's actually a verse in the Bible.
Backward.
I know. Them's fighting words, yeah. Moses, you guys are brothers. Why are you fighting? He said to two fellow Hebrews. Yeah. But then to Sister Ashley's point, all these nations, like Paul said in Acts 17, referring to Adam, but it goes through, of course, from Adam down through Moses, Noah, and then on to the rest of us. From God made from one man, all the nations dwell on the face of the earth. So big picture there.
There
Yeah.
are differences, just generally. I'm sure there were specific differences, but were they based on ideologies? Was it based on religion? Was it based on skin color? What were was it territory?
Or was it like denominations with people just getting mad at each other and going
Yeah.
their different ways and starting a new thing?
Would you say just generally? I know I'm sure there's certain specifics.
I would say generally it's people wanting to have a space of their own and to do their own darn thing in their own space. Land's a big part of it. Land, and well, not to the extent that Hitler used it as a horrible justification for what he did, but blood and land. And I've used that phrase before, not even knowing the context at the time that it was abused with, but just general observation coming out of the Tower of Babel. Basically what things come down to is blood and land. Okay, whose blood on what land? Okay, what do our ancestry DNA things do? Well, they trace our blood and see on what spot of land is most of that blood concentrated. And so that's what a lot of it comes down to. And when there was a big deal about one of our recent popes who came from South America. Hey, we've got a South American pope, woohoo! Well, his parents were Italian or something like that. He didn't have South American blood in him. He just happened to be from, yeah. And so at what point do you become, Dinesh D'Souza makes this point, had this observation, how he or any of us as example, I can go to Russia and live there 30, 40 years and never be a Russian. I can go to China, live there 50 years, never be a Chinese, but we can come to America and we can be Americans. So that's pretty spiffy. But recognizing that, and what do we mean when we say these words? So now we're getting into, are we talking the race ethnicity thing? And again, how small a difference in DNA that really is, how much alike we actually are and all these things. But we have this, we get comfortable and we have this xenophobia, which I'm not a big proponent of. I think that gets overplayed and beyond the reality of it. But this reservation towards outsiders. Or we have some stipulations. You can come down south, we just don't care how you did it up north. You know?
Well, we were just with a bunch of people yesterday from all over, I mean, Californians, but yet they identified as Southern, right? I mean, but how many would you say were actually born in the South? If you were to look at DNA, is there a Southern DNA? Some people will tell you yes, but like my DNA, is my DNA Southern? Obviously, so it's a point, right? I mean, it's a point, but yet when we all stood around and held hands and sang Dixie, we were all,
Nothing else mattered.
Nothing else mattered, right? So it's an interesting point when we talk about, these divisions that, especially when you're talking about entire groups of people that are, as we go through time, that are, some of them are being eliminated,
Yeah.
and like I say, conquered and enslaved, and
Babylon's gonna wipe out Larsa and Ison.
yeah, it's pretty, that's our history. I mean, right?
He is gonna try to wipe out the Israelites.
Yeah, that's and what we're seeing happen today with groups, different groups wanting to come and take over land and wipe out peoples and undo, the ones that came before, so.
Well, and again, that was Hitler's horrible justification. Hey, there's some people in Poland with German blood, so therefore we're going to conquer Poland or reclaim Poland. Putin in Russia with Ukraine, there's some people in Ukraine with Russian blood, therefore we're going to reclaim Ukraine. And so, yeah, obviously those things are overstepping their bounds, literally. But there is a beauty when it's not done in aggression. There's a beauty in appreciating heritage, not anti anyone else, but heritage of where your blood has come from. And being able to celebrate not just where that has come from, but the journey, another word that gets overused, but the journey bringing you to where you are now. Which is why for me, when I see these things, when I mentioned the king of Ison or the king of Larsa, well, those names aren't in the Bible, so we're here in the Bible Sunday school. Why do we care? They are all descendants of Noah. They are all, therefore, quote unquote, Bible people. And they all had an interplay and interaction with the Lord's people that we read about. So while some of these folks are kind of sequestered over here, the world they're going to be coming back to is different from the world they left. These 215 years they spent in Egypt. And in fact, the ones who left that world died, passed on what information they did to the next generations. They come out not seeing the world that their forefathers told them about. So yes, there are some differences here. So, whereas the Bible says, as the Lord says in the Bible, a time of the Amorites or a time of the Gentiles is being fulfilled. And that relates to some Old Testament times, that relates to some end times. And so, again, let's not miss God at work behind the scenes in the moving and shaping of people. There's a purpose being worked out, a purpose that's available for all to participate in, but there's nothing under the sun that is out of God's hands or that he is not molding and shaping towards a benefit to bring something out for his people. So we are, as we're counting down the years here, moving on down, 1546 BC, we are now just 20 years before the birth of Moses. So we're getting there. So let's keep moving. 1545 BC brings us to a new Pharaoh in Egypt, and this makes a difference. This is the guy named Sobekhotep III. Now, Sobek means crocodile. Hotep means is content. So I guess they want content crocodiles. Well, when you're dealing with the Nile River, I want those crocodiles to be content too. Remember, their livelihood is the Nile, and the dreams that Joseph had were both Nile dreams with the cows and the corn and all that stuff. So Sobekhotep III, here he is in the center here, facing one way and again facing another way. Sobekhotep III worshiping Setet over here on the left and Anuket over here on the right. This central hole was made when this relief was used as a grinding stone, long after the original carving. Yeah, in Egypt, as it happens in other places, while some things are left standing today and it's beautiful to see, sometimes they take things that were so marvelous once upon a time and they'd repurpose them for building blocks for new things. This thing here showing their Pharaoh worshiping these gods, they later took in, okay, let's just stick a rod in there and use this as a grinding stone. Yeah.
I guess they're recycling though, right?
Recycling, yeah.
Repurpose, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
Better than that than destroying it, right?
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. They did destroy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have found pavement stones that when we overturned them, they had writing on them and markings and art that were just repurposed. Yeah. So this guy, Sobekhotep III, in his reign, he's the 20th ruler of the 13th dynasty. We have documents that record a list of Asiatic domestic slaves who have Semitic names, several of which are in the Bible, in biblical Hebrew. Sobekhotep III is the king who reigned in Egypt a generation before the birth of Moses. Again, we're about 20 years out. The Israelite population will be subjugated by these native Egyptians, forced into slavery, as we know Exodus tells us. Now, there's a document called the Brooklyn Papyrus. That's his scarab seal. Ashley's a big fan of scarab seals. Yeah, I know. So the Brooklyn Papyrus, this is in the Brooklyn Museum. This comes from this time. Yeah, this, the front, which fancy word for the front is recto. The front or the main side of this document papyrus contains a copy of a royal decree by Sobekhotep III, authorizing the transfer of ownership of a group of domestic slaves or servants. Egyptian word there is kenmu, transferring them to an estate down in the city of Thebes. The verso, the reverse side, sorry, that's Hathor, the cow goddess. The flip side contains a list of household servants that are probably the servants being referenced on the front side. Now, when we analyze the names of these servants, over 50% of the 95 names listed are Semitic. These foreign servants were designated in Egyptian as Amu, the Egyptian term for Asiatic. Brother Clay's point about these names for all these things. The Egyptian names are also separately listed, the names given to them by their owners. For example, we read the Asiatic Dodi Huatu, who is called Ankuhem-Huset in Egyptian. So we've got their Hebrew name, and then he who is called, and their Egyptian name. Just like we had in Joseph, we have Joseph, who is Atanaphaneah, he who is called the one who lives. So there's his Hebrew name, and then there's his Egyptian name.
Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel, Belteshazzar. Absolutely. Now, Sobekhotep III, he's down in the south, in Upper Egypt. But most of the Hebrews are in the north, in Lower Egypt, in the land of Goshen. So, since this document is listing the slaves down south in an Upper Egyptian estate, it's kind of a logical conclusion that the Asiatic slave population in the north, in Lower Egypt, and especially in that delta closest to the Promised Land, would have been a much larger group and would have been most of that workforce up there. So if they had this many slaves, over 50% down south, since most of the Hebrews were up north, they had probably even more slaves up north in Egypt here. And we have other documents showing that the size of the Asiatic, the Hebrew Semite community in Egypt at this time was significant. The number of folks here. In fact, get this. A guy named William Hayes, who's actually the editor of this Brooklyn Papyrus, as they're documenting it and categorizing it, cataloging, all that stuff. Here's one of the things he says about this, the official guy in charge here. One wonders by what means such quantities of these Asiatic serving people found their way into Egypt at this time, and how they chanced to be available as domestic servants for private citizens. Well, gee, I wonder. We have the Bible. It gives us the answer. The ratio of women to men, by the way, was about 3 to 1. Well, the Bible tells us about something happening with the men also. Yeah. So what we're going to see here is a sudden rise to power, a new sub-dynasty of pharaohs who did not know Joseph, as the Bible says. This new line of kings is from Upper Egypt, down south, with its seat at the old Middle Kingdom capital, which was Ichitawe, or however that's pronounced. So here's Lower Egypt, where most of the Hebrews are. And so right there is Ichitawe down here. So the southern Egypt had more, looks like kind of had more land, but less concentration. Where here it's more concentrated up here where the Hebrews are. So there's the southern capital, but here's the northern capital right up here. So what these guys down south were doing, seizing power throughout the Nile Valley, all the way. So they forced a division in the land of Egypt again, between the north and the south. And we're going to talk about that more next week. So that's where we will close for now. Any thoughts, comments, questions on these things we've talked about? All good? Yeah, please.
Why would you the Lower Egypt is north of
Mhm.
Is it because Lower Egypt is lower because it's at season?
Good guess, but wrong guess. I've got a lot of those. It's actually because of the direction of the flow of the Nile River. So if we zoom out here, the equator. Yeah, it's thinking about that. The equator is down along here. Sorry, it's actually a little slow. And so up here, most rivers flow down from north to south. The Nile flows from south to north. So it's going from start to end. So their top to bottom, if you will, is from south to the north. Yes, the northern hemisphere. The equator is down below here. Yep.
If you look at topo map, you can see. Well, it goes downhill.
Yeah. So this isn't about elevation, where a topographical map would show that. This is about the direction of flow. The Nile River flows from the south to the north into the Mediterranean Sea. And so they consider the start the top. So that's why they call it upper, even though it's not, because normally we think going from north to south. That's why. So yeah. And because we can't have anything simple and easy, right? Or everything's supposed to conform to us modern Western folks, right? If they all did, it would just make more sense, but no. So we have to do a little extra work to understand where they were coming from and how they decided to do things. Humphrey Bogart. Yes, good movie. African Queen. Yes, good stuff. So, all right. So we will pause our discussion here for now. We'll stop our share, stop our recording, and pick up next week with the new line of pharaohs and the change for the Lord's people in Egypt.